Hi, I'm Icha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. This week on the show, we are looking back at some of the biggest moments of 2025. Yesterday, we discussed the key events that shaped cinema and OTT this year with the Indian Express's film critic, Shubhra Gupta. And today, we turn our attention to the field of health and medicine, where the conversation over the past year has been shaped by a few recurring developments. The weight loss drugs, originally designed for diabetes, became a major topic of discussion, while India's health system saw a stronger policy push towards the use of AI. And at the same time, air pollution remained a persistent and pressing public health concern throughout the year. And so to break down these trends, we are joined by the Indian Express's Anona Dutt. Anona, a lot has happened this year in the health sector, and one of the major highlights is the WHO issuing its first guidelines on weight loss drugs, explicitly treating obesity as a chronic relapsing disease, and also stressing on the long-term care for it. So tell our listeners, that does calling obesity a chronic disease actually change anything on the ground? Or moving into the next year, we still just treat it as a lifestyle condition in India?
So this definition of being a chronic condition, chronic relapsing condition, sort of changes the way we treat obesity. So far, most of the people saw obesity as just a cosmetic problem, so to say, and even the bariatric surgeries, etc., were seen by people as a cosmetic procedure. Although, if you talk to the doctors, they would say that it is done to sort of provide relief to people who are morbidly obese, people who have conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, etc., because of this underlying obesity, and who actually improve when this obesity is taken care of. So this is sort of like a change in viewpoint. But what it also promotes is a change in health systems management of obesity. So if you look at something like diabetes or hypertension, which are known chronic conditions for which, people take lifelong medicines and they have to do these lifestyle interventions like exercising enough, eating healthy food, all of this advice and treatment is right now offered at the lowest level of healthcare facilities. So even at, say, a sub-center or a primary health center, a person can be diagnosed for and treated for something like diabetes and hypertension. But that is not true of obesity. While the doctors will give you advice on losing weight, what this definition promotes is a comprehensive care being available at all levels of healthcare services. So that would include, of course, counseling on what needs to be done in terms of lifestyle change, counseling with a dietitian to understand how you can, easily modify your diet in a way that you lose weight. But that will also come with the drugs or, interventions such as bariatric surgeries. So there is a push with these WHO guidelines towards creating an ecosystem where, again, obesity as a disease can be managed throughout, and there is a constant, say, follow-up like you would do with, say, a diabetes or a hypertension patient.
Right, and for those who may not know, could you tell us which weight loss drugs are currently available in the country and also how they differ from each other?
So this year has been exciting for India when it comes to weight loss. Both of the major molecules for weight loss, which have been available across the world for the last 4 or 5 years or so, have now become available in India. So earlier this year, Eli Lilly introduced its molecule tirzepatide, and Novo Nordisk also introduced its semaglutide, which are the two most popular weight loss drugs available across the world. They have also launched various versions of these drugs. So, for example, the easy injectable pens. There's also the recent launch of the diabetes dose of the injectable drug. And what we have seen is a rapid growth in the market of these anti-obesity drugs, especially when we look at the market share of tirzepatide, which is by Eli Lilly. So there has been a massive growth. And of course, the impact of this we will see in the next few years. But definitely people have started taking these medicines, which has already happened in countries such as the US.
And Anona, approximately how much do these drugs cost in India?
So when it comes to India, the price of these medicines, semaglutide, the highest dose for semaglutide is around, say, 16,000 to 17,000 rupees per month. And the lowest is about 10 to 11,000. This is after the price drop that we spoke about. So when it comes to tirzepatide also, the price is about similar. It ranges from, say, 14,000 a month to 17,000 a month for the lowest to the highest dose of the drug.
Right, and we understand that in India, doctors have been raising concerns about casual use and the growing cosmetic demand for these drugs. So who is this drug really meant for, and who should be staying away from it?
So if you see in the latest GLP-1 drugs, starting with semaglutide, was actually initially meant for the treatment of only type 2 diabetes. But people started using it off-label because of the weight loss potential of the drug, which is, some people losing even up to 20-25% of the body weight, which is similar to what you would see with a bariatric surgery. So that itself sort of perpetuated this cosmetic use of these drugs, which is something that should not be done. These are medicines which are meant to help, especially people who are obese with various conditions for which obesity is a risk factor, as well as, they have reached a plateau. So this is not the first line of care that a doctor would ever prescribe. The doctors would essentially motivate the patients, so to say, to initially have some lifestyle changes, some dietary changes. And when they are able to stick to that, and even with that, if they are not able to lose significant weight, that is when these medicines are added on for weight loss. So it is a challenge. And now that the drugs are available in the country, there is likely to be this cosmetic use of the drugs, but essentially it is meant only for people with very high BMI or people with high BMI and, conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, things like that. So it is not meant for everybody, especially not for cosmetic use.
And Anona, a lot of patients are anxious about taking these drugs indefinitely. So talk about what happens if someone stops taking these drugs.
So the evidence so far that we have, and this is years of evidence that we have, especially with semaglutide, which was a molecule that entered the market before, what we see is that once you stop taking the medicine, there is an increase in body weight. So people do bounce back like with any other obesity, measure. So even if you go on a diet and if you then stop following the diet, there is a reuptake of the weight. However, so far what they've shown is it's not as much as the weight at the starting point. But now there are certain gaps which has also been identified by this WHO guideline, which needs to be addressed, which is like finding out whether the dose can be tapered off. Like with certain medications, you would see that once an acute thing has been taken care of, you slowly reduce the dose and people stop the medicine. So whether that is possible with the drugs, whether there could be a lower dose on which people can maintain their weight while not taking very high doses of the medicines, all of these questions need to be answered. But also what a lot of clinicians would say that it is like any chronic condition, for example, hypertension or diabetes, in which you would actually keep taking your medicine lifelong once you have the condition. So many do see it that way, but there are still studies going on to figure out what sort of dose can be given, whether these medicines can be stopped altogether, whether there should be a lower dose given. All of this is being studied at the moment.
And another sticking point for these drugs is the cost, right? Though recently Wegovy became much cheaper in India as competition from Mounjaro picked up, but moving into 2026, what changes will matter the most for these drugs? Like accessibility, tighter regulations, or something else?
So till 2025, one of the biggest challenges was getting the drug itself. as it was not available in India. So people would usually go to, other countries. People would travel to, say, Dubai and get the drugs. This was happening before 2025 when the drugs were finally introduced in the Indian market. Now the challenge, of course, remains the cost, and the companies have actually worked towards reducing the cost. For example, Novo Nordisk actually partnered with another country to produce the same drug and cut the cost by, say, I think it was around 33% or so. So the companies themselves have reduced the cost. But the big thing that will happen going into 2026 is that semaglutide patent is going to come to an end. And that would likely open markets for other companies to manufacture these GLP-1 drugs. What we have seen so far with other diabetes medicines is as soon as these medicines go off patent, generic versions become available in India, and the generic versions cost, as little as 10% of the cost of the patented medicine. So we are likely to see cheaper versions of these medicines of semaglutide becoming available likely next year, which will in itself increase the access to the medicines much more.
And Anona, another interesting highlight this year was that the Health Ministry's research wing got a multi-year enhancement plan explicitly naming AI in healthcare. So how should we interpret this funding push?
So there has definitely been a push towards AI to solve gaps in the system when it comes to healthcare delivery this year. There has been a systematic development across the major health institutes, take for example AIIMS Delhi and other places which have developed AI solutions that can be added on to the government programs for various diseases. So we spoke about different government programs. One would, of course, be the tuberculosis program of the government, which is a key program considering the aim was to eliminate the disease this year in 2025. They've added a couple of, either they've added or in the process of adding AI solutions to the program right now.
Right, and even during your reportage, you highlight how AI screening improved TB case detection. And say, even in regard with cancer, we keep hearing that AI will help with screening, radiology, pathology backlogs. So where across the treatment process can AI really make a difference?
So one is the AI-based handheld X-ray devices. So essentially what happens with tuberculosis is that even before, say, a person develops symptoms such as coughing, TB can be seen in their lungs in an X-ray. So the government actually started including these small X-ray devices which look sort of like digital camera, which can be used to take X-rays in a PHC or even more remote setting, probably even in the community. These machines can generate a digital X-ray within seconds. And these devices also come with an AI system along with it, which can give you a probable diagnosis of TB within seconds. So that would mean that the technician would be able to tell a person that they might have TB within seconds, and then they would refer them to the higher center to get a confirmatory molecular testing done. So this is a great way of finding cases actively, especially cases which might not even show symptoms. The second innovation is something called Cough Against TB. This is also to reach the last mile and to detect more and more TB cases with the least amount of, say, resources being utilized. So what can be done with this app is that any healthcare worker, Asha Didi, A&M, whoever is visiting the houses of people can ask those with TB-like symptoms to record their cough. And this small recording can be put on this AI platform, which has analyzed, several sounds of cough of the TB patients and can again tell that this person is probably TB positive or if they are likely to be TB negative. This Cough Against TB led to a 13% increase in the number of TB cases being detected. And when it comes to the X-ray devices, it was utilized during this 100-day campaign that the government had launched last year in December. So in that campaign itself, they were able to find 2.85 lakh additional cases with no symptoms. So that is the impact of these AI tools.
And you also highlight how there have been efforts to strengthen health information systems for clinical decision making. So, how does AI help there?
So there is something called the Clinical Decision Support System, which is essentially a plugin into the government's telemedicine platform called eSanjeevani. And it actually guides the doctors at a higher center to reach the correct diagnosis quicker. So essentially, the AI model is actually based on the data that has been collected from this telemedicine service itself. The initial few lakhs of patients who were seen, their data was utilized to develop and train this model. And now it can recognize around 300 symptoms of the most common diseases that are seen on the platform, such as, respiratory infections, gastritis, fever, diabetes, etc. And once the patient's symptoms are put in, and certain additional details like what was the duration of the symptoms, what was the severity, the location of the symptoms, and of course the patient details like their age, gender, etc. Once all of this information is put on the system, it actually gives the physicians who are remotely located. So the eSanjeevani actually facilitates communication with specialists who are in super specialty centers or tertiary care hospitals of the government to the primary health center. So the details are to be filled by the doctors or health staff from the primary health center, and the doctors in the medical colleges and tertiary care centers can use the details to give the diagnosis. And this clinical decision support system actually helps by giving 3 most probable diagnoses. So it sort of reduces the burden on the doctor.
And another interesting use case of AI that you highlight is early outbreak detection for infectious diseases like COVID or GBS, helping analyze spread patterns and also identifying high-risk areas. So could you talk a bit about that?
So one of the key ways in which the government's surveillance mechanism used to pick up on, these unusual clusters of symptoms, etc., would be by going through local newspapers. That is a time-consuming task, however. So now they have developed an AI which can scan several newspapers in 13 different languages to actually raise such health alerts. And, initially it would also raise alerts for symptoms like, people getting into accidents, etc. But over time, it has realized what kind of symptoms the surveillance team is looking for, and it raises these alerts, which are then investigated by the local surveillance teams. There is also another example of AI being used is the AI-enabled fundus camera. It's the camera, which is used to take the image of the retina. But this one is enabled with AI, which means the image can be interpreted on its own by the model instead of the requirement for a technician or a physician to be present right there. So this again has been done to plug the gap of availability of trained staff as well as availability of these fundus cameras in several remote places. While the government has been over the years, increasing the number of these cameras available in primary health centers, this is just an addition to that. And the AI model can be plugged into any of the cameras that may have already been there in the health system. Now, why is this essential? Because this camera can detect diabetic retinopathy, screen the diabetes patients for it and detect it quickly.
I don't know, for those who may not know, could you tell us what is diabetic retinopathy?
Diabetic retinopathy is essentially a condition where, high blood sugar over years damages the blood vessels in the retina of the eye, and it can lead to a complete vision loss. The challenge is there is no symptoms as such that people feel before they start losing their vision. So usually people would come to a doctor only once they have started losing their vision or they have lost their vision. And in this case, there are ways to sort of stall the damage to the retina, but there are no ways to reverse the damage once it's been done. And which is where this AI-enabled camera would be very helpful.
And now moving away from AI, another point of discussion this year was how India's target of eliminating TB by 2025 was not met. So why was that? And also, was this an unrealistic target?
So basically, the international goal of eliminating TB was for 2030. However, India committed to do that 5 years ahead of the target in 2025. This was a challenging goal to begin with. Of course, this declaration and the announcement by PM Modi at an international stage meant that there was a lot more commitment towards it, a lot more money came into the program. The things were being implemented in a mission mode, but it was a very, very difficult target to begin with. And then COVID further complicated the matter because the detection of TB cases actually went down during the COVID period. And of course, it has bounced back and now we detect far more TB cases than we used to before COVID. But there was a dip for a couple of years. And that does have an impact because if patients are not detected, then they further spread the infection. So that meant that 2025 started looking much more unrealistic. However, it has been a good commitment because it has brought in more steam to the program.
And so, Anuna, given the push for the program, is it safe to assume that this target could be achieved in 2030?
I mean, of course, we do not have the figures yet for this year, but in 2024, we detected 27.1 lakh cases. And from what I hear from experts who have been working with the program, we are about to detect a similar number of cases in 2025 as well. So elimination is not a possibility yet, and we do not have another fixed target, say, for 2030 as well. We have not declared it officially, but there is a lot of effort that is happening now to sort of bridge the gap. Over the last couple of years, the number of cases being detected has increased significantly. So there are two numbers that we usually see in these annual TB reports. One is the estimated number of cases. There is a methodology and, there's a modeling which predicts the number of cases that are likely to happen each year in each country. And the second number is the reported number of cases, which is the number of cases that have actually been detected, tested positive, and are now registered in the national program. So we've, I think, now come to a point where we're detecting almost all of the cases that are estimated. So this year, the gap between the estimated case and the detected cases was just about 1 lakh. And when I say just about 1 lakh, that's because, say, I think 10-15 years back, that gap was about 15 lakhs. So we have significantly reduced that gap, which means we are detecting more cases and they're unlikely to spread the disease further. There has also been an increase in the coverage of TB treatment is what we've seen. And like I mentioned in the previous segment, there is also a push towards a lot of these innovations coming into the program. So all of this is likely to go a long way towards probably ending TB by 2030. But there have also been challenges. For example, last year, there was a stock out of even the commonly used medicines for the treatment of TB. So we are looking at the positives as well as the challenges that have happened. But yes, there is a lot of work that is happening now towards this goal of elimination.
Right. And of course, when talking about health, we cannot not discuss how 13 of the world's 20 most polluted cities are in India. And when people hear that AQI is bad, it can still feel a bit vague. So what's the clearest way to explain what pollution does to the body, especially the long-term exposure to it?
Right. So when we talk about pollution, it's not just the immediate effects such as, some people facing breathing difficulty, some people having, teary eyes because of the irritation, or some people also have skin conditions that get flared up. All of this happens. Yes, these are the acute changes that happen in the immediate days after there is a spike in the pollution levels. But what is more concerning is that we see that the air pollution and over the years, the exposure to it can actually impact every system in the body. It's not just the lungs. It can have an effect on everything, including your brain, including conditions like diabetes. It does impact the children as well. So there is enough research to now suggest that, high air pollution levels can lead to premature babies. It can lead to development delays in babies. There is also some links between certain brain conditions and pollution. Of course, the lungs are severely affected with pollution. It can lead to, conditions such as COPD. There is an increase in asthma as well. There is also an impact on heart conditions. So, for example, we know that increased level of pollution can also increase the hypertension. So, your blood pressure levels, it can increase. So, the control of diabetes goes down with air pollution. There are other systemic changes. It affects the hearts. It also causes a lot of infections because it sort of impacts the immunity of the body. So air pollution is not an isolated thing which leads to just some acute symptoms. It can have a chronic impact over the entire lifetime of a person, right from the time when they are in the womb. So it is a very, very serious condition.
And lastly, Anona, as you mentioned, we still see pollution as a seasonal inconvenience. So what would you lay down as your non-negotiables for 2026 on air pollution?
So, of course, when we talk about air pollution, the highlight of it comes in the national capital, which sees one of the worst air pollutions. And of course, the entire of the Gangetic Plains is where we see very bad air pollution levels during these months. What is needed is, of course, there's a, national clean air plan and whatever, but there has to be implementation of it. Like when we talk about Delhi, looking at what are the sources of pollution, and it cannot just be the, parali burning. That's not the entire reason for the bad air in the region. It is also the amount of vehicular emissions that we have, the construction that we have. So just, taking a look at what is causing the pollution and developing a plan to bring down the pollution levels over the years and not a short-term plan to sort of mitigate. See, the GRAP being implemented is a very short-term measure to help people when the pollution levels spike. But that is not something that can take care of the actual reasons why this becomes a problem every year. That has to be addressed in a systematic plan over the years, and we need to work on that.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargav and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.